Are people separate than nature, or is everything interconnected? Are all living systems connected in some way? And why does this matter to humans?
Well, everything is interconnected, just that we've been through a few hundred years of the illusion of separation, manufactured very calculatedly by the Newtons and the Bacons and the Descartes, basically for colonizing other parts of the world and colonizing nature. They were writing Cartesian reductionist mechanistic physics philosophy exactly when colonization was beginning and East India Company was being created. My PhD thesis is on non-locality and non-separability in quantum theory. So at the quantum level, we know everything is interconnected, not separate fragmented particles. Indigenous cultures have known that, and I'm just sharing with you from my book, Democracy from Chief Seattle. This we know. All things are connected, like the blood which unites our family. All things are connected. And then in amazing cultures and civilizations like mine, based on interconnectedness, and interconnectedness at the level of consciousness, interconnectedness at the level of the flow of the vital energies of life, the food, the water, the air, interconnectedness of our intelligences and our senses. So the illusion of separation is a short-lived illusion, and it is time for us to transcend it.
What is your new book, Oneness versus the 1% about?
Well, oneness versus 1% is at one level just an easy way to talk about the very tiny group of oligarchs and billionaires running the world today. No one elected them to power. No one supported the model of deregulation, rent collection, imposition, surveillance capitalism that they have institutionalized from the top. And I witnessed this personally at the Paris summit on climate change. And Bill Gates was strutting around, basically instructing heads of state. And his new book on answers, solutions to a climate crisis, are repeating everything he said on the stage that day. Everything the opposite of what the science truly tells us. And then a year later, Bayer was bought by Monsanto, and we dug deeper, and my son has worked on this book with me. He's done a lot of the research. So two things were happening. Billionaires were becoming more powerful than governments, so a political economic shift, and they are running the show because they're totally unregulated, and they're in every country. And the second was that the corporations who looked very, very big were now being eaten up by the billionaire money and the new asset management funds of the BlackRocks and the Vanguards. And then we realized it's just one rule of big money, unaccountable, destroying democracy, destroying the earth. And that's the challenge we have, to face the 1% through the interconnectedness that gives us power, interconnectedness with the earth that makes us realize we are living beings, interconnectedness as earth citizens, but interconnectedness through solidarity. Yeah. Yes, each of us celebrates our womanhood, and we do Women's Day and Black Lives Matter marches, but the next level is one humanity on one planet. And it's only that solidarity that will bring the oligarchs and billionaires under control. Otherwise, they'll destroy the world while they talk about saving the world through their philanthro-imperialism.
Tell us about your latest documentary.
Well, it's not my latest documentary, just a group of people who, Jim and Camilla Beckett. Jim had been following me for a long time. I used to be part of Symposia on the Sea and on religion, science, and the environment. And he was a bit surprised that a woman from a mountain area in India, could walk into the UN and talk, and there'd be standing ovation. And he wanted to solve this puzzle. So they've done the film called Seeds of Vandana Shiva. It's their film. It's not mine. I never write about myself. I never make films of myself. I mean, that much ego I don't have. Yeah, I write about the world.
How close are we to running out of drinking water for parts of the world?
I've grown up in a beautiful land where we sing songs to our rivers, and our national anthem itself talks about India being the land of the Ganges and the Yamuna. And I've seen water at 10 feet, even in the desert areas. And then came the Green Revolution. And the World Bank said, oh, this is primitive. Put energized tube wells, and we'll give you loans, and we'll give you subsidized electricity. And now they're cursing up the farmers. So 75% of the water has been destroyed in a few short decades because of a water-thirsty green revolution, which uses 10 times more water to produce the same amount of food. And the second is this thinking of every commons either as a mine to extract or as a dump yard to put your waste. That thinking has destroyed our beautiful rivers and streams and turned even the Ganges into a garbage dump. And that's why we keep having projects to clean the Ganges, but till the spirit brings back reverence for our Mother Ganga, this will not heal. And in fact, a recent disaster in my mountains on the 7th of February was once again related to the violation of the rivers. So we can have water forever for everyone, not just all human beings, but all beings, because all beings need water. The trees need water, the animals need water, the birds need water, the worms need water. Or right now we have 1 billion people without drinking water. And there is now an attempt to financialize water and put it on future trading and speculation and derivatives to make money, to turn the scarcity into a new place to make money. And that will take even more water away. The bottled water took water away. I have helped women in Pachimada who for fighting Coca-Cola, which was mining 1.5 million liters of water per day. And they were running out of water, drinking water, walking 10 miles. And they said, this must stop. And they shut down Coca-Cola, and I stood with them. So we are running out of water because of a bad industrial agriculture model, privatization and commodification, and profiteering from water by putting it in plastic bottles. I think it's the most obscene thing that human beings could do to water and to themselves and to the planet.
What is biodiversity and why is it important? Why does it matter if we destroy the biodiversity of parts of the world like the Amazon?
Well, biodiversity is life. I mean, I'm trained, as I mentioned, in quantum theory. Biodiversity I've learned from nature. Biodiversity I've learned from my sisters in the Chipko movement. Biodiversity is life, but biodiversity is not just life. Biodiversity is the fabric of life that weaves the fabric through the interactions, the symbiosis. And indigenous cultures knew this. New science is telling us about this, but the old Cartesian hangover is still practicing a mechanistic, colonial approach to biodiversity. For example, treating biodiversity as a genetic mine, treating biodiversity as something to be patented. I've written books about this. Biopiracy. I have fought cases on this, the neem, the basmati, the wheat, 1,500 patents on climate resilient seeds that we have saved in India. And the corporations just to come and say, I invented this. And worse, now Bill Gates running with digital genomic mapping. And just like in colonial times, they took paper and drew a map and said, this is mine. The French said, this is mine. The Portuguese said, this is mine. The Germans said, this is mine. The Belgians said, this is mine. That's how they divided Africa, in straight lines, cutting across rivers and mountains. They are now doing exactly the same to biodiversity. What a map was to colonialism, the genomic maps are to the colonialism of a life. I have called it bioimperialism. And there's a new report out. I feel very sad because we have an international treaty called the Convention on Biological Diversity to protect biodiversity. And yet the billionaires in the World's Economic Forum are again behaving as if they've just discovered it as a place to make money. And they've written there's a Dasgupta review that says the only way we can deal with biodiversity is put it as an asset on portfolios to make profits. Now, the only way you can conserve biodiversity is loving it as part of your family, recognizing that all biodiversity is an extended Earth family and all beings are our relatives. That's how indigenous cultures protected biodiversity over millennia. And that's how colonial culture destroyed it in a few decades. And the Green Revolution wiped it out in 50 years.
Is there any way to reverse climate change? And how? And is farming part of the solution?
Good farming is very much part of the solution. Bad industrial agriculture is very much part of the problem. Because what is climate change? It's a rupture of the Earth's capacity to recycle her elements. Carbon cycle is the recycling of carbon. Nitrogen cycle is the recycling of nitrogen. Now you disrupt the carbon cycle by taking fossil fuels out of under the ground, burning them, and burning 600 million years of nature's work in fossilization. And this then builds up the pollution layer. Meantime, the same activities that are leading to fossil fuel industrial agriculture are also leading to destruction of the Earth's capacity to reabsorb that carbon or that nitrogen. The forests are being cut, the Amazon is being cut to grow GMO soya. Why? Did we all stand in chorus and say, give me GM soya to eat? No, subsidies are for biofuel and animal feed. 90% goes for biofuel and animal feed. We are destroying the richest biodiversity zone, the lung and the liver of the planet. And this is because there's money to be made. This is what's leading to the rupture. And I have the figures. 50% of the emissions come from an industrial globalized agriculture, and I can share this in detail with you. But we can, in a decade, heal those cycles, which are nutrient cycles. They're the cycles of health of the planet are similar to the systems of health in our body. And healing the body and healing the planet has the same approach. My work, Soil Not Oil, I wrote a whole book on this before the Copenhagen Climate Summit. And we had started to show that through giving organic matter back to the soil, we can actually start reversing. This morning, I was addressing a conference on regenerative agriculture, and the latest data is between 10 to 50 tons of carbon can build up in the soil if you do the right kind of farming. So the solution to climate change is love the earth, thank her, give her carbon back, her organic matter back. And I've said this often, earth care is the most important climate action.
What could we have done differently that might have prevented the COVID-19 crisis?
All the evidence is showing that in the last 30 years, as globalization of the economy and industrial invasion into forest ecosystems has accelerated, new disease epidemics are coming out of the forest. They weren't diseases in the forest, yeah, but they're now becoming the new disease epidemics. There are 300 new pathogens. All of them spillover effects through invasions into the forest. Ebola, HIV, SARS, Zika, the list is long. I know this in detail because there's a particular part of India which is a tropical rainforest, the Western Ghats, and the deforestation triggered a monkey disease, a hemorrhagic fever. As the monkeys started to get, the forest went, monkeys got closer to human habitat, and then the fleas on the monkey caused this hemorrhagic fever, just like Ebola and other diseases. So we have to stop doing industrial agriculture that's land wasteful, that is causing hunger, and we have to respect the integrity of our forest ecosystems, the integrity of the species in those forest ecosystems, the integrity of the cultures, because where are the last remaining cultures that know how to live at peace with the forest, in the forest?
Is the earth inert and dead, or is it alive? And does the earth have any rights, or is it okay for us to just do whatever we want to her?
The earth is very alive, and even scientists are recognizing that she is Gaia. Of course, indigenous cultures recognize she's Pachamama in the Andes. In India, we call her Bhumi and Dharitri and Vasundhara. She has 1,000 names, and it's all about not just her being alive, but her being the mother and we being the children. And as long as that recognition is there, we will recognize that she has rights, and she gives us rights. So actually, after the Copenhagen summit failure, Evo Morales, the then president of Bolivia, said, I wasn't here to defend the rights of polluters, because 5 polluters got together and wrote a voluntary agreement. And that's what became the Paris Agreement. And he said, I'm here to protect the rights of Mother Earth. And then he brought some of us together and we wrote the draft UN declaration that went actually all the way to the General Assembly on the rights of Mother Earth. And my book on this has just been published in the United States. It's called Reclaiming the Commons. And it has, the last chapter is on the rights of Mother Earth and how these rights are now being recognized, because you can't give Mother Earth her rights, but you can recognize them. Just like you don't give indigenous people their rights, you prevent the historic injustice of denying them their full humanity and their full rights.
What do you mean when you say biodiversity of the soil? Why is the soil important, and what's happening that concerns you? How does the health of the soil affect the health of the people?
Well, health, as Albert Howard said, is a continuum from the soil to the plants, to the animals that eat them, including the human animal. We forget we are animals. You know, part of the Cartesian divide was to make us think we are not animals, we are, you know, and we are separate and we're superior. That's what's called anthropocentrism. And this is what Howard wrote. A soil teeming with healthy life in the shape of abundant microflora and microfauna will bear healthy plants. And these, when consumed by animals and man, will confer health on animals and man. But an infertile soil, that is one lacking sufficient microbial, fungal, and other life, will pass on some form of deficiency to the plant, and such plant, in turn, will pass on some form of deficiency to animals and man. In 1 cubic meter of soil, a Danish study found 50,000 earthworms, 50,000 insects and mice, 12 million roundworms, and a gram of soil contains 50,000 algae, 400,000 fungi, including the mycorrhizal fungi, that really weaves life in the soil, billions of bacteria that take organic matter and turn it to soil fertility. The soil is the most amazing biodiversity, and that soil biodiversity then nourishes the biodiversity within us in our gut microbiome. If there's biodiversity in the soil, our gut microbiome is healthy. If we've desertified the soils, our gut microbiome is desertified, and that's the beginning of ill health and disease.
What is biodiversity-based organic farming? And tell us more about regenerative agriculture.
Well, you know, I started to look at agriculture in 1984, when in Punjab, the farmers had started to protest. And Punjab is where the Green Revolution, chemical farming, was first introduced anywhere in the world, in the south of the world, through imposition of the World Bank. And in Punjab, 30,000 people were killed. And that same winter, thousands died in the city of Bhopal when a pesticide plant owned then by Union Carbide, now by Dow, which has a lovely name, Corteva, when it's merged with DuPont. And when I did my study for the United Nations, I was doing the study for the United Nations University. And I wanted to understand where the conflicts were coming from. And that's when I realized that when you have a monoculture of the mind, you will only see wheat or rice. You will not see what went into it. You will not see what happened to the soil. You will not see what happened to the farmer. The thousands have committed suicide because of debt. And you will definitely not see the quality of food. So I started to frame this as a biodiversity issue, not a monoculture of the mind. And I wrote a book on that, but a biodiversity and an organic farming, because you can have commodified, industrialized organic farming. But for me, biodiverse organic farming is working with nature, letting nature and her biodiversity do the work. You don't need synthetic fertilizers if you have biodiversity in the soil. You don't need pesticides if you have so much diversity of plants that they manage the balance between the insects and no one insect becomes a pest. So biodiversity-based organic farming is just recognizing that nature works through diversity and through the principle of return. And that's what we have to follow. regenerative organic agriculture, just a new way of talking about it. And I'm part of the founding of the Regenerative International Movement. And this was partly because about 10 years ago, the industrial system realized that organic was growing very fast. And they did what they do, started to attack organic. Yeah. Can't feed the world. In India, their stupid attack was, I'm bringing it from abroad. And then I started to do a Harvard lecture to show Harvard took it from India when he was sent in 1905. And he wrote a book called An Agricultural Testament, which has been published by the Rhodes Press in the United States. And they didn't get that one. And just because they try and criminalize one of our most important, and organic means that which is integrated, that which is living. I said, I'm not going to give up organic, but regenerative became important in the United States. And a whole new certification of regeneration started. But regeneration just means you allow the soil and biodiversity to regenerate. You allow your health to regenerate rather than the industrial globalized system of degenerating the soil, degenerating our health, degenerating the farmer economy, just degenerating life overall. So it's movement from a degenerative system to a regenerative system.
Why do you say food is a weapon?
I didn't invent the phrase food is a weapon. I quoted Kissinger, who said so clearly in the 60s that we have to use food as a weapon. And he first used it in Vietnam. They realized that the Viet Cong were very strong because when you do rice cultivation, you have to do it as community. You have to go together to transplant. And they said, we've got to break this. And they started bread and subsidized wheat and milling factories. And that's when he first said, when you control food, you control people. So we have to use food as a weapon. Even the Green Revolution was part of this food as a weapon thinking. And I've said, you take it further when you start controlling seed, then seed becomes a weapon of control. But now in the case of seed, you're not just controlling humans, you are trying to control life on Earth. So I think both seed and food are what weaves life. And they have to be instruments of peace, not weapons of war.
How can we feed the world if we just have small farms? Don't we need big chemical farms?
The data is now so clear. My own experience showed me that the smaller the farm, the more it produces, because the one ingredient on a small farm, and particularly small farms run by women, that's absent on a large farm, is love and care. And in any living system, love and care just creates healthier ecosystems. But the FAO's data has confirmed this, that 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms. Only 20% comes from industrial farms. Industrial farms are not feeding the world. And I have a lot of detail in this in my book called Who Really Feeds the World, which I was asked to write when there was an expo on food in Milan in 2015. And it has all the data of the UN agencies, but my own life and my own research and my own practice has shown me that small farms are the only way to take care of the earth, to ensure we have society. Why are hundreds of thousands of farmers of India protesting? They're protesting against policies and a system that would devastate them with the introduction of large corporate farms. And as they say, we are fighting not just for our survival, we are fighting for the soul and the soil of India, because without us, there's no one to take care of the soil. And it's when we take care of the soil, that's when we create an India that's India, an ecological civilization. Otherwise, we will be like the Midwest, desertified, emptied out of its farmers, an empty countryside. And of course, the Bill Gates of the world want to rush this further, farming without farmers, farming with drones and surveillance cameras. And that's the big dream, because they, I remember there was a song, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, I'd hammer all over the land. But now it is, if I have a surveillance technology, I'll put everything under surveillance. And that's a big part of the problem. They don't know how to do anything else. They don't know how to care. They have no knowledge of life, but they now have surveillance tools in their hands. It's their hammer. And they're hammering the earth, they're hammering the farmer, they're hammering our lives.
What do you want people to know about genetically modified foods? Without GMOs and chemicals, would people starve?
People would have real food if we got rid of GMOs and chemicals. And we'd have more food because we'd have systems that allow small farmers to survive and they produce more. That would make food affordable by having local economies. When I started to look at GMOs, I just finished my book on the Green Revolution, 84. I started about 86 maybe. And I was invited to a meeting where the corporation said, we have to do genetic engineering in order to take patent claims and collect royalties. That's where our future profits will be. And we have to have an international treaty. And that 87 meeting is what led me to start saving seed, led me to create Navdanya. And people can go to the Navdanya website to find out what all this is about. At that time, I did two things besides saving seed. I started to work with my government and with international agencies to say, we've had fossil pollution, that's climate change. We've had chemical pollution. Rachel Carson wrote about it in Silent Spring. And now we have genetic pollution, and we should be prepared to deal with this. So we created a whole language and framework on biosafety, and the United Nations appointed me on the expert group to write this framework for the international law, which became the International Cartagena Protocol. So we have a regulation that's being violated, but more importantly than that, the first GMOs were commercialized in 92. In these 20 years, we have seen a total failure. The BT cotton failed absolutely in India. The yields went down. You're supposed to control pests. The pests went up. People are dying of pesticide poisoning. They're spraying more pesticide. In the United States, the Roundup Ready crops have failed. Now, so they're trying to bring gene editing. But it's a failed technology, and it's failed technology because all living systems are self-organized, and they're complex, and they work in deep, deep harmony. When you shoot in a clumsy way a gene and add it with an antibiotic resistance marker and add it with a viral promoter because your tools are so clumsy, you rupture the self-organization capacity. And that is why instead of controlling pests, you create resistant pests. Instead of controlling weeds, you create super weeds like the amaranth, and you now say we'll push the amaranth to extinction through gene drives, even though the amaranth is sacred to us in India. So GMOs are a failed technology, and the new GMOs are based on the same mechanistic, reductionist, clumsy assumption that led to the failure of the first generation. And dismantling safety will harm people, will harm public health, will harm biodiversity, and harm the planet. And for a few years, now the tech billionaires are reading this new GMO race. It will not feed people.
Before World War II, how did we grow food? And then why, after the war, did we switch to chemical fertilizers?
Well, before World War II, we grew food working with nature. We grew food through biodiversity. We grew food through recycling. And in fact, that's what Albert Howard found functioning totally in a flourishing way in India and wrote the book, The Agricultural Testament on Organic Farming. World War II led to the spread of chemicals in farming because the World War and Hitler's experiments in concentration camps were basically based on deploying a group of companies called IG Farben and their American partners. DuPont was involved, Monsanto was involved, the current poison cartel was totally involved in IG Farben. And the original work was to create chemicals to kill people. You know, the gases in the concentration camp are the ancestors of the pesticides. The explosives are the ancestors of the synthetic fertilizer. And I am so, so disappointed that Bill Gates actually has a whole chapter on how we grow things. And he is standing in front of a mountain of fertilizer and saying, this is the most important innovation. even though we know it's a very big part of climate disaster. That's him standing there. And he's celebrating Haber-Bosch. Haber-Bosch were part of IG Farben. And I think Haber's wife committed suicide because she could not tolerate the violence. So war chemicals became agri-chemicals. And then because of the power of these companies, and just remember, it isn't the case that here were German companies and here were American companies. They were together. The people were fighting, soldiers were dying, but the companies were working together with this experiment with death. And they were together in becoming the poison cartel that pushed chemicals in farming and created chemical agriculture, and then totally rewrote the curriculum, rewrote the science. Seed is an empty container. Soil is an empty container. Fertilizer is a fuel for plants which are a machine. I read every book that is taught when I was writing the Green Revolution book. And I said, how could we lose our way so badly? Because of a group of killers taking control of the very important source of what makes life, our food. And I think we need to take lessons from that for the period now, because again, a small group of billionaires are wanting total control. Google now has a life sciences division, and they say we've got to defeat Mother Nature. That mentality has brought us the ecological crisis, the health crisis, the democracy crisis. And 4 people declaring war against the earth are now being asked to offer the solutions. We have to energize our democratic spirit much, much more deeply than we are doing.
What contribution does industrial agriculture make to climate change?
So when I was going to Copenhagen, I realized that agriculture was not in the discussion. It was as if it's only about energy consumption. And do you get your energy from fossil fuels or do you get it from solar? And that was it. But the climate issue is the disruption of the metabolic order of the planet. It's much deeper than consumptive energy. So I wrote this book, Soil Not Oil, both because I could understand that the soil held the solutions, but the way industrial agriculture was being practiced was a big part of the problem. So I'll give you the figures. About 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the production systems based on fossil fuels and chemicals based on fossil fuels, like synthetic nitrogen fertilizers that Bill Gates is promoting as a solution. Second is land use change. But land use change is just an anonymous way of describing invasion into the Amazon to grow GMO soya, invasion into the rainforests of Indonesia to grow palm oil. And this is 15 to 18% of the emissions. And then you take good, healthy food. You could go to your garden, eat a carrot, get some cabbage, get some lettuce. No, how can you have food sovereignty? So you must process it and transport it and package it and retail it and make it totally anonymous. And that's 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions. But I would add 75% of the chronic disease problem. That's where it's ultra-processed food is where it's coming from. And then because you celebrated uniformity rather than diversity, you create waste because in the farm, you throw away things that aren't that perfect size. Because of the best before dates, you throw away so much good food. All of this is linked to the industrial globalized system. And an ecological regenerative system would not only get rid of this 50% emissions, it could actually draw down the built up carbon and nitrogen and solve the climate problem in a 10-year window. There's another little bit in this. I said, oh my gosh, Mr. Gates, go to 6th grade biology lesson, will you, before you write a book you're selling all over. But in this, he's saying, I can't believe it. I come from the land of the sacred cow. And our cows don't stink. My mother gave me her cow shed to start the research foundation. And our cow shed didn't stink. It's only factory farms that have methane emissions. Mr. Gates is trying to make us believe we have one container, he calls it the container. We have one stomach container, and therefore we don't emit methane. But the cows have 4, and therefore they emit methane. Cows are meant to eat roughage. The roughage and herbs get digested through the 4 stomachs, but you feed them intensive feed and put them in factory farms. you're going to get methane emissions. CAFO, have you seen the stink when you go past a hog farm, a pig farm, a beef farm, a factory farm? That's where the stink comes from. So I hope some of you will hold a lesson on cows and show that the four stomachs are a blessing for the cow, not a methane emitter.
Who wants to take control of our seeds through patenting, and why is this bad?
Well, very clearly, I was at a meeting where the idea of patenting was laid out by the very same corporations that had worked in Hitler's time to create chemicals to kill, and then turned these chemicals into agrochemicals, which have continued to kill. The insects are gone, 83% insects are gone, the monarch butterfly is gone. They said very clearly in a 1987 meeting called the Laws of Life that we have to patent the seed, and we can only do it through GMOs. And I said, but a patent is granted for an invention, and a seed is not an invention. A seed is not a machine. And this is by the time we are through. It will be treated like a machine. It will be treated like a manufacturer. By the year 2000, every seed will be a GMO seed. No farmer will have their own seed. And we will define it as a crime if they save seeds. And that's what intellectual property on seeds were. That day, I decided to save seeds. And that day I said, no, I will work with my government to write laws that seeds and plants are not inventions. They are our relatives. So our law, Article 3J, says plants and animals and seeds are not human inventions, therefore cannot be patentable. So who wants to patent seed? It was the poison cartel. But the poison cartel has now dissolved into control by the billionaires. Today, Bill Gates singularly wants to control the seed. We have just done a new report called Gates to a Global Empire, because I found that the Green Revolution, which had created this monoculture in farmers' field, but taken all the diversity of farmers and put it in this consultative group of international agriculture research gene banks, and about 25 of them. So our rice went to Erie, our potatoes went to the potato farm, maize and wheat went to Summit in Mexico. This year, Gates has taken control of the public seed banks of the whole world. He's the single biggest donor. In addition, he was the brain behind the Svalbard Doomsday Vault in Norway. To call a seed bank a doomsday vault, for me, seed is about life. And our living seed banks are where we sow hope. So Gates is very much the new player who wants to control seed.
Why do you say there's poison in our food? What's wrong with pesticides and nitrogen fertilizers? Why is it important to grow our food organically?
Well, I don't say there's poison in our food. Studies have shown there's poisons in our food. And all the public health work has brought out so much. We have a manifesto on food for health, where I worked with some of the top doctors who work with cancer, who showed that the poisons of the chemicals are leading to cancer. A president's report in America showed that only 5% of the cancers are genetic. 95% are really from our toxic environment. Roundup was established by the United Nations agency called the International on Research on Cancer, that glyphosate is a carcinogen. We know that there's a link between pesticides and cancer, pesticides and the problem of infertility, of endocrine disruption. These are all studied. And we have a very good synthesis in our book. But I'll just share with you the costs. So we have, a publisher wanted me to synthesize my 36 years of research on biodiversity, food. And we put together the costs of industrial agriculture. Just cancer is $2.5 trillion. Diabetes is 2.5 trillion. Endocrine disruption, 549 billion. Antibiotics resistance markers, birth defects, neurodegenerative diseases. We are talking about a whole class of new epidemics from chronic diseases, all of them linked to poisons. Nitrogen fertilizers, well, most of it runs off into the ocean, creates dead zones, runs off into water, creates nitrate pollution. And now the World Bank, which promoted nitrogen fertilizer and is now working with Bill Gates on the Green Revolution in Africa, they're realizing in Africa, wherever there's nitrate pollution of the water, people are losing their capacity to work. It weakens your body. It is important to grow food organically because that's the law of food. That's the law of ecology. That's the law of nature. I have repeatedly said, food is the currency of life. When you grow food organically, you're growing food according to that currency. Money is not the currency of life. When you grow food to make money for the oligarchs, the poison cartel, then you spread disease, you destroy the earth. So growing food organically is absolutely vital for the earth, the farmers, and human beings who eat the food.
What is the extinction crisis and what's causing it?
Well, the extinction crisis is, I would say, twofold. The first is that species are being pushed to extinction. Some people are calling what we are living through the sixth mass extinction. We know we are driving 200 species to extinction per day. 1 million are threatened with extinction. But since we depend on that web of life, we are part of that web of life, pushing other species to extinction means pushing the human species to extinction. So the extinction crisis is also a threat to the very existence of human beings on this planet. We have had a very narrow window of existence. Yeah? The Earth is 4 billion years old, 200,000 years we've lived here. But in the next 100 years, according to all scientific trends, we could make it impossible for ourselves to live. What's causing it is the same poisons. The chemicals that were designed to kill people in concentration camps were then rewritten as pesticides. And insects were defined as the next enemy. But insects are our friends. There are bees and our butterflies and our pollinators. So the war on bugs was declared. And if you see the ads of the pesticide industry, they're going to eat your food, you'll starve, just see the ads of the pesticide industry. And it's not an accident that today 83% of all insect species are gone. Monarch butterfly, just in the years when Roundup started to get used, 90% gone. And I have met people in Mexico who were protecting the monarch butterfly being killed by those who want to promote industrial agriculture and use Roundup.
Tell us more about Roundup and Roundup Ready crops.
So the word Roundup is basically a Monsanto trade name that rounds up everything green. And this, I was in the biodiversity negotiations and they actually stood up and said, it kills everything green. Well, why would anyone want to make a chemical that kills everything green when we want everything green to flourish? That's our food, that's our life. That's where photosynthesis takes place. Now, Monsanto did not invent this chemical. It's glyphosate. And it was invented by a Swiss chemist and then used for cleaning pipes because it chelates metals. So it was used pushing it through pipes and cleaning up pipes. And then some fell and it killed plants. And Monsanto said, wow, we can use it as a weedicide. And not only did they then patent Roundup as a weedicide, they then started to work on genetically engineering crops that are tolerant to Roundup, because since Roundup kills everything green, it would have killed the plant, the soya, the corn, the cotton. So you put genes for resistance, and then everything else is supposed to die, except that they forgot that nature is intelligent and there's something called evolution, and the other plants evolve resistance. So the Palmer amaranth now is resistant, and they're having to spray even more lethal weedicides. And there's a case going on in France on Agent Orange, which was another weedicide, herbicide, where Dow, DuPont, Roundup, Monsanto were involved in the Vietnam War. They used to burn the forest to be able to see the villages to bomb them. And the case, people are still being born deformed. People are still being born victims of this war. It's chemical warfare. And I really feel Roundup should be rounded up. I've been leading a campaign in India with women farmers because Monsanto has ads that have women's hands tied in greens. And it says, liberate yourself, use Roundup. But what women are collecting in their fields is medicinal plants, greens for their curry and food fodder for their goats. To declare this as a problem and spraying Roundup as a solution is part of the big public relations blitzkrieg that this entire chemical cartel is based on.
What are Monsanto's and Bayer's goals, and will they accomplish them?
Well, I think Monsanto Bayer's goals are what their founding goals were: profits through violence, extermination, and control. First, it was applied to human beings. Now it's been applied to all life on Earth. And will they succeed? Well, Monsanto was bought by Bayer. And that's part of the reason I wrote the Green Revolution, the book on oneness versus 1%. And Bayer has lost as much value as it paid Monsanto for. So in effect, Monsanto's value is zero. And that was the collapse of market value. Yeah. There are thousands and thousands of cases of cancer victims in the United States. Recently, Bayer tried to undo these cancer cases with a $2 billion settlement, thinking they'll buy a few lawyers and say, finish the cases. But most of the victims refused, and most of the lawyers of the victims refused. So far, they have not had their way. And more countries are saying we will ban Roundup. Germany has just announced by 2024, they'll phase it out. Mexico has said they'll phase it out. More and more countries, all of the mayors of France have said, no one will spray Roundup around the villages where there are children and people. So the movement to stop these chemical companies is growing. Their devious methods, of course, keep growing too. But in my many years, I have found people are winning more often than the corporations.
How many companies control the whole food system?
Well, I started to look very closely at this when I started to look after that meeting of 87, where they said we'll have a GATT and trade-related intellectual property rights and a WTO, and we'll make it illegal to save seeds. So I started to follow WTO. And I became part of a member of the International Forum on Globalization that created the Seattle protests, and we stopped WTO. It was supposed to be the most powerful institution, and people organized to shut WTO down, not just in Seattle, but later in Cancun too. So at that point, there was the poison cartel, 5 companies, now there are 4, wanting to control the seed through GMOs and patenting. There were 5 grain traders, merchants of grain, like the Cargills and the Conagras, who were writing the free trade in agriculture. Monsanto wrote the TRIPS agreement, Cargill wrote the agriculture agreement. So now there are 4 because Cargill bought Continental. Then there's something called sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. And one would think it's about health. No, these are pseudo-hygiene measures to make real food illegal, to make that wonderful cheese of Italy illegal, to make the wonderful snacks in India illegal. They even shut down Gandhi's cold-pressed virgin oil mill because they said to make oil, you have to have 2 chemists and a lab. But if I'm making the oil in front of my eyes with my own groundnut, how do I need a lab? I know my organic groundnut is pure. So I did a satyagraha, this civil disobedience and a march, and we protected Gandhi's Ghani. So who are the people who create these pseudo-hygiene measures? Leading it is Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Nestle, the junk food industry. That time it was a group of 3, but basically adding up to 12. Then you started to get the the Amazons and the Walmarts, into the retail and e-commerce. So they've joined hands and they are driving. Walmart drives and shapes agriculture very hugely. And as I mentioned, and it's in my book, Oneness versus 1%, the giant billionaire investment funds, the BlackRocks and the Vanguard, and Bill Gates, Microsoft. If you look at new initiatives in agriculture, they're all about digital agriculture. They're about farming without farmers. They're about surveillance. They're about one agriculture all over the world. He launched it last year, just at the time of the COVID, and calls it Gates Ag One agriculture for the whole world of diversity. And this too is in our report, Gates to a Global Empire. So, and they've joined hands, So there's the old big ag, the poison cartel, big ag, big junk food, big e-commerce, big retail, big finance, and big tech. And they've become one cancer on the food system. And if we allow their control to grow, there will be no food, because Gates is investing very heavily on artificial food, fake food, lab food, cellular, milk without cows and fish without fish. And again, in this book of his, he's got said, cellular meat in the lab is exactly like a living animal. Yeah. How can it be? How can one cell being grown out artificially? How can your Impossible Burger with 14 patents be real food? So we are finding an interesting convergence, a dangerous convergence, and one thing that's very important for people to know. So we created after the war UN agencies, a Food and Agriculture Agency for food, one country, one vote, a World Health Organization for health, one country, one vote, the Convention on Biological Diversity, one country, one vote, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, one country, one vote. Now you look at all these agencies. Who's calling the shots on climate? Mr. Gates. Who's calling the shots on biodiversity? Mr. Gates. Who's calling the shots on health? You just watched him as the single biggest funder and controller of Gavi and WHO. But most people have not noticed that the FAO, which is located in Rome, has always had a food summit in Rome. Gates has hijacked it and taken it to New York. 500 organizations that have participated over the years for food sovereignty and defending food as a right have decided to boycott. Because if we allow the UN system to be hijacked by a billionaire, there is no international platform for protecting the environment and protecting public health and defending democracy and defending human rights. And that, but then we can say, okay, we have then a global dictatorship.
Can you explain what seed saving is and why it's important?
Well, seed is the first link in all of life. Life begins a seed. And in a food system, food begins a seed. So a rice seed gives me rice plants, a millet seed gives me millet plants. But one seed can give you 1,000, 1,000,000. Seed saving basically means you take part of it and eat it, and it gives you food, but you save part of it for the future and sow it, so you get future food. So seed is future food. Now, that's where industry came in and said, oh my gosh, farmers save seed, so we can't make money. So they worked on preventing farmers from making money, either legally through patenting, because if something's patented, you can't save it, but also through biological methods. Hybrids don't be true, and GMO hybrids can't be used again. So they worked on making seed from being a renewable, life-giving resource to a non-renewable commodity. So how do you save seed? Take real seed and save part of it. Of course, you have to know exactly what kind of drying it needs. You have to be careful. Seed is living. One of my colleagues who has saved 1,400 varieties of rice in Orissa, when she talks to farmers, I heard her so beautifully. Say, oh, but so difficult. So she says, if you have 4 kids, don't you take care of all of them? Yes, we do. So we used to grow 200 kinds of rice Why are you growing only one? Why do you think the other rices are not relevant? They are our children, but they are our plant children. So saving seeds is seed freedom and seed sovereignty for the farmer. Saving seed is the freedom of the seed itself to renew, because all technologies are preventing seed from renewing. And the nature of seed is to multiply, to regenerate, to renew. And therefore the urge of seed is respected when we save seeds. And most important, our work has shown that when you save seeds, you change the farm economy, because the highest costs are going for buying non-renewable pattern seed, which requires chemicals. All breeding has been done by chemical companies in order to sell more chemicals, whether it's through genetic engineering or even the Green Revolution varieties were bred for using more fertilizer. That's what Borlaug's work was, and that's why he made the semi-dwarf varieties. So saving seeds is important, because seed is life. And in seed sovereignty lies food sovereignty, your freedom. You cannot have food freedom if you don't have seed freedom.
If you were fully in charge of the world, what are the 10 most important action steps you would implement to save our planet, our health, food system, biodiversity, and the environment?
Well, I would do exactly what I'm doing in my little life if I was in charge of the world, because I behave as if I'm in charge of my little life, and I must do the right action. First, we must recognize Mother Earth and recognize her rights. And so the rights of Mother Earth should become international law. We must recognize that over these years, we've had a human rights treaty, a convention on biological diversity, climate treaty, under the Convention on Biodiversity and Nagoya Protocol, a biosafety protocol. We've created amazing international laws to protect the seas and the oceans and the air. I would just make sure they are not violated and they're not forgotten. I would make sure that we promote ecological farming, we promote seed saving and the freedom of farmers. We promote local economies, because the globalized system of industrial agriculture doesn't emerge out of competition. It emerges out of subsidies. Our tax money is taken to destroy our small farms. Our tax money is taken to destroy our health. Our tax money is taken to destroy the science. So what I would do is make research independent of the poison cartel. I would definitely insulate small farmers from corporations and the big billionaires. And I would ban chemicals, I would ban GMOs, I would ban junk food, because they don't belong to a food and agriculture system.
What role throughout history have women played with seeds in growing food, and why is this important?
Well, women are the original seed savers, and women are the first agricultural scientists. And in my book, Staying Alive, I wrote a lot about this. But I also then was asked by the United Nations, by the FAO. I wrote a report for the FAO on most farmers are women, and the data shows most farmers are women. But that women with less land produce more food. 5% of Nigeria's land is controlled by women, but they could produce 50% of the food because men produce commodities. So women are experts in biodiversity-based organic farming. Not just that, women are experts in nutrition, because they don't grow commodities for profits. They grow food to nourish their families. And we've just released 2 reports. One is called Earth Rising, Women Rising. That is really a beautiful dialogue between women farmers and some of the leading nutritional experts and health experts. And another, Women Feed the World Through Earth Care. The assumption is that you got to violate the earth in order to feed the world. But we are showing that through earth care, we produce more food. And that's true food, that's real food.
What individual actions can each person take to help themselves and the planet?
Well, we all eat, but eating has been taken so out of our minds. We always think someone else has to decide what we eat. No, food freedom is where freedom begins. So begin with knowing what you're eating. Where did it come from? How is it grown? If you can, grow your own food. Start a little garden. If nothing else, take a plant and put it in your windowsill. Because that relationship with that one plant will establish your relationship with all plants. And that's why in India we have this beautiful culture of the sacred basil, where we say, I am very small, and I promise I'll take care of you. But in taking care of you, I am recognizing that in you lies the whole cosmos. So I will take care of you as if you are the cosmos. And we need each of us to have our sacred tulsi, our sacred plant. And finally, we must recognize that the greedy who stole software and patented it, and the tech barons was making money out of a surveillance capitalism, they have their eyes on our food, and they want a food imperialism. So in any period of imperialism, any person wanting freedom has to be aware of what that imperialism is and take inspiration from all freedom movements of the past. Thoreau refused to pay taxes for slavery and started civil disobedience. Gandhi said, you can't force us to not make salt from the sea. Nature gives it for us to survive, and we will make salt. We will not obey your law that makes it illegal for us to make salt. And so I took inspiration from that and started the seed satyagraha and said, our ancestors and nature have given these seeds, and we will not obey laws that prevent us from saving seeds. And I noticed today I got a beautiful message on the satyagraha for the soil. People are going to march on the same route where Gandhi marched for the salt, to protect the soil.
How does industrial agriculture and chemical-based agriculture affect women?
Because in good agriculture, women have a very important role. In industrial agriculture, there are only two things that are introduced: machines that get rid of work, or chemicals like Roundup that get rid of work. Who is impacted first? Women. My book, Staying Alive, on the chapter on food, has lots of detailed statistics on how the Green Revolution pushed women out. But it has huge impacts on reproductive health, because the chemicals impact the reproductive health of women much more. Our new report is showing that infertility is a very big problem. But in my book, Staying Alive, my sister, who's a medical doctor, was on the commission of the government on a new phenomena that has started called female feticide, killing the female fetus in the womb. I was doing studies on the Green Revolution, and one day she was sitting with a map on female feticide rates. And I said, but that's exactly the map of the Green Revolution areas. Wherever chemicals have come, women's work value has been degraded because women's work has been rendered useless. So then women are treated as disposable. And when they're treated as disposable, you get the violence of actually not allowing them to be born. So the impacts are huge. And that's why a non-violent farming for me begins with the rights of the earth and rights of women.
Why do you say a circular economy is best to sustain the earth and society? And what is a circular economy?
A circular economy is one which circulates things, because what we are living through is basically this extractive economy becoming so perverse. You extract from the soil and society, but beyond a point, you've extracted so much, all the money is sitting here with the billionaires, you get an upside down pyramid, which can topple any time, whether it topples with a climate disaster or a species extinction or a COVID pandemic. But all of those are topplings of a precarious system. A circular economy, recognizes that nature works in cycles. Nature circulates nutrition. That's the first cycle. The second is nature circulates water. That's the hydrological cycle. So there are two laws of nature: nutrition cycle, hydrological cycle. A circular economy begins by respecting those two laws of nature, then developing practices that reinforce nature's laws. Organic farming returns organic matter. So it reinforces the nature's recycling. Good organic farming conserves moisture in the soil. It then starts to circulate water. Both of these together are an answer to climate change. For me, climate change will only be addressed when we realize that we have to start recycling. And most people have forgotten, like Mr. Gates is citing Haber-Bosch, but the person who really developed organic chemistry and plants was Liebig. And I had to write a foreword to his 1896 book or something on the law of recycling. And he's saying, I'm having to write this because they've taken my knowledge and commodified it and distorted it. But this is not what I was saying. I was talking about the law of recycling, not buying commodities, guano and everything else that could be bought that time. And so recycling is nature's laws. And I would say now to build circular economies in our times is to consciously follow the way nature works. And the circular economy in society is then mimicking nature, but adding the element of justice that you give back. So you redistribute, you don't keep taking. And our work in Navdanya has shown that when we practice circularity, farmers' incomes go up tenfold. Tenfold more the farmers earn because more is returning. In the global supply chains, farmers are earning 1 to 5% of what the consumer pays. The rest is all profits for the processors and traders. And we get junk food. Yeah? No one. The farmer loses, the earth loses, the eaters lose. In a circular economy, the earth gains, the farmer gains, the eater gains.
How does the amount of minerals in the soils differ today versus 100 years ago? What effect does that have on people and kids? And why has the soil becoming deficient in certain minerals?
Well, from the studies I've seen in the industrial West, food has lost about 60 to 70% of its nutrition. And because industrial farming only measures yield per acre, and Bill Gates' book is only about yields, but yields are only about the mass, not about the nutrition. So you're measuring nutritionally empty food and saying, I'm growing more food, but a bigger apple, which is nutritionally empty, is not more nutrition. And research is showing that an old apricot in Sardinia is equal to 56 modern varieties of apricots in the phytochemicals and nutrients that it has. So about 60 to 70% loss in industrial societies. But my valley is only a few decades ago, it started to have chemicals. So we did a 20-year study recently with the top soil ecologist of India. And this is the data he produced. So the green is the organic farms, where on everything, on carbon, on nitrogen, on zinc, on magnesium, in the soil, these nutrients are more, and therefore in the plants, these nutrients are more, and we are bringing back nutrition in the plants. Across the board, every nutrient has disappeared in chemical soils. Every nutrient. So you're getting zinc deficiency leading to depression. You're getting magnesium deficiency leading to attention deficit disorder, but it's treated as a psychiatric, both are treated as a psychiatric disease to be treated by Big Pharma. Why are we losing our nutrition? First, because that militarized mind said soil is an empty container and plants only need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium from factories. Plants need much more. And where does the much more come from? Those amazing living organisms in the soil whose food is the organic matter we give them. They give us the nitrogen and the magnesium, they make it. So this input-output calculus in the mechanical paradigm is so wrong because the soil is living, the plants are living, and as long as we nourish the living processes through the web, soil food web, plant food web, insect food web, we will have more health per acre. And that's why I measure not yield per acre, but nutrition per acre and health per acre. And we can feed 2 times the world if we protect the earth.
Tell us more about factory farms and why do we have them?
Well, I think we have factory farms because a bunch of powerful men love to torture other beings. They just love it. Yeah. For me, factory farms are animal prisons. All good farming has always had, and Albert Howard has said it so clearly, all good farming has to have annual crops. It has to have trees, farm trees, and it has to have animals, because that's what allows the recycling. The plants eat the straw and we eat the grain. Now we are feeding animals the grain. And there's a competition between animal feed and human food. Then the plants give us cow dung. And we worship cow dung. You know, we have a festival in November to worship cow dung. It's not a waste and a pollutant and a stinky, gassy methane waste from a CAFO. Cow dung is the most celebrated product of a cow. And that's what gives future life to the soil. And we have in this book that, on biodiversity and agroecology, we have about 100 ways of creating compost in India, using the cow urine, the cow dung. It's all in this book. It's available right now from Westwell Press in India, but it will be available from Synergetic Press next year in the United States. So factory farms are animal torture chambers, just like human beings were put in concentration camps. That mentality is exactly what allows this to happen. But then there's profits. The profits come from the fact that animal feed trade is more profitable than food, and most subsidies go there. But there's also profits in the fact that when you start putting animals, then you can start doing all kinds of owning of animals like you own the seed. They just did gene editing to have hornless animals, except that they got bacterially infected. Why do you need to remove horns? I mean, in India, we celebrate the horns. Why do you need to remove the little tail of the pigs? Why do you need to remove the beaks of the animal? Because you put people in, the animals so close, you actually encourage what's called cannibalism in them. And then you have to start torturing and you start doing genetic engineering of animals to fit into your torture mode. And so I really believe animals should be free. Animals should absolutely be free, and they should be grass-fed because they're herbivores and they're not beanvores. They're not GM soya wars. They're not Amazon GM soya wars. So I think we should see an end to factory farms, absolute end to factory farms.
Are we using up all of the land, topsoil, minerals, and nutrients that we need to feed the world?
As I've watched over these last decades and analyzed fossil fuel-based industrial agriculture, I've realized that not only is there a violent mentality of being at war with the earth, but there's also an ignorance about how renewable systems renew themselves. They have cycles of renewal. You'll have water forever if you allow the hydrological cycle to work. You will have fertile soil forever if you give back to the soil. You will have minerals forever if you allow soil organisms to produce all the minerals. Basically, what we've done is use a non-renewable fossil resource, made non-renewable toxic chemicals from it, and then the destructiveness of fossil fuels and chemicals is destroying the renewability of our soils, of our minerals, of our water, of the biodiversity and the seed. So we've taken the renewable and made it non-renewable by depending on the non-renewable, both as the imagination as well as the main organizing principle.
How close are we to running out of food for parts of the world?
If you think of the fact that 1 billion people are hungry, it's not that there isn't enough food to feed them. We've created such an unjust system that is denying people their right to food, because we've stopped thinking of food as the right of all, food as a currency, and we're seeing food as a commodity. And the data from the UN was showing that with the lockdown of COVID, the hunger pandemic is going to be much worse than the COVID pandemic. It's going to kill more people. The FAO and the World Food Program was saying it. But when you ask, are we running out? I already mentioned that what is privilege is industrial agriculture, but it only gives us 20% of the food, and yet it's using 75% of the world's land. Yeah. So it uses a tiny bit. It gives us a tiny bit of the food, uses most of the land, Most of the food we eat comes from small farms that use hardly any land. Most of it is in women's hands. But that's not the end of the story. That 75% of the land under industrial agriculture is responsible for 75% of the ecological destruction of the planet, whether it be desertification of soils or the disappearance and pollution of water, or 50% of climate change, and 75 to 80% of biodiversity extinction, and in the case of insects, much, much faster. So if you just do a rough calculation, if 75% destruction is coming from a food system that's giving us only 20% of the food, if this industrial food system grows to be 40%, it will create a dead planet, because 75% destruction will become about 100% destruction. So we will totally run out of food, but also the food producing potential of the earth. And that is, to me, the extinction crisis.
What is deforestation? What is the cause? Why is it important to stop it?
Well, deforestation comes from a mindset that every bit of land should be used for profits. And even forests should be just used for monocultures and clear felled. And why is the Amazon the Amazon? It should be growing GM soya. My own involvement in the ecology movement began in the early 80s, when a beautiful movement started in my region. And I'd seen a forest disappear and a stream disappear. And I said, I'm going to volunteer with the Chipko movement. Chipko means to hug. So Chipko became a response to deforestation. The cause is greed. The cause is a mindset that thinks in terms of A, monocultures, 2, extractivism and profits, and C, is absolutely indifferent to what a forest truly produces. And my beautiful sisters changed the slogan. They said, forests don't give us timber and profits. The forests give us soil, water, and pure air. So forests are important because they are the very basis of life.
What's the relation between the biotech and chemical industry and the governmental agencies that oversee them?
Well, the governmental agencies are supposed to oversee them. And when we started writing the regulations on biosafety under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was signed in Rio in 1992, the governments were regulating these companies. The only country where they weren't being regulated is the United States. And the US never signed the biosafety protocol, and it never signed the GMO labeling law. And that's why in America, there is no law for GMO labeling. And they keep playing tricks. They prevented Vermont from having a law. And now they have bioengineered label, which tells you nothing about is it genetically engineered or not. So basically, as the corporations have spread, this takeover of government has spread. And, I've had so many protests, I've joined so many protests against, the prevention of Americans the right to know what they're eating. And there was a dark act, Pompeo had led it through Congress. It was called the Dark Act, the denial to Americans of the right to know. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter whether it was a Republican president or a Democratic president, but they were all acting for the biotech industry. Sadly, as they spread around the world, they have corrupted more and more governments. And instead of the governments regulating them, they are now undermining regulation. But I am so happy. Yesterday, I did a big webinar with colleagues from Mexico, where they're saying we will phase out GMOs. Corn is too precious for us. We will not allow corn. Peru had an entire referendum. And then the Congress passed, and then the president gave a seal, and they asked me to write a letter to the president. They asked me to do a seminar. Peru has said another 15 years, we will not have GMOs. So wherever there's democracy, independent governments, there are no GMOs. Wherever democracy has been killed, independent governments have become corporate governments. The corporations control the governments.
How is force being applied through chemicals?
Well, since the chemicals in agriculture are war chemicals, the first element of violence is built into the material nature of these chemicals. They are war chemicals. And for anyone who's forgetting this, please read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring again. Read how she's talking about this war mentality and this clumsiness against the creative fabric of nature to use war chemicals to destroy and rupture nature and make spring silent. But they're also violent because nowhere have people said, give us chemicals. I did the very detailed study of the Green Revolution in India and wrote the book called The Violence of the Green Revolution in Punjab, and realized that the violence of Punjab was because of the chemical farming, because they destroyed the soil, the water, and the economy of the farmers, and the farmers rose in protest. And then there was violence. And then the vicious cycle of violence kept growing till our former Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, was assassinated in this vicious cycle of violence. I have studied how India didn't choose the Green Revolution. It was a violent imposition by the World Bank and IMF and the Rockefeller Foundation. So it's violent. Individual farmers never wanted the fertilizers. They were told, if you want to repair a roof and you want a little bank credit, but before that, you have to show you took the fertilizer. So you had to have proof that you're using fertilizer to live your normal life, send your child to college or school. So conditionalities were put on countries like India, and they were put on the individual farmers. That is violent. And then the final violence is, I wrote the book on the Green Revolution. The narrative gets spun. They change the narrative from being a farmer's protest into being about religion and make it look like it's about a religious conflict. It's not. Even now, as hundreds of thousands of farmers are protesting still, it's the biggest strike in human history. They still try and give it a twist. It's about religion. It's about extremism. It's about this. It's about that. And, you know, when we shut down the World Trade Organization in Seattle, I remember Zolik, who was the US Trade Secretary, Commerce Secretary, he actually wrote an op-ed in the International Herald Tribune saying anti-globalizers are terrorists. So it's so easy to call anyone a terrorist, yeah? Those of us who defend Mother Earth with love, those of us who defend our cultures and our freedom, our seed freedom, our food freedom. So the spin is violent. Fake news is violent. You know, fake narratives are violent. And that's why the subtitle of this book of mine, Oneness versus the 1%, is Shattering Illusions, Seeding Freedom. Illusions are violent.
What has the reaction been to your books, lectures, and films from the media, from universities, scientists, government, and industry?
Well, you know, most ordinary people who care for the earth, care for their health, care for democracy, thank me a lot for writing books. I don't write books because someone pays me to write a book. I write book because for me, it's both clarifying my own ideas, responding to a challenge and a puzzle. Like for me, Green Revolution was a puzzle. Borlaug gets a Nobel Peace Prize, but Punjab has violence. So where's the peace? So I wanted to understand where's the peace. Yeah, Green Revolution is supposed to feed the world. Chemical farming is supposed to feed the world. There's hunger. Why is there hunger? Right? Who really feeds the world? So my books are really solving puzzles that, you know, there's a propaganda machine telling us one story, and there's a reality that tells me something else. Over the years, I've seen a very big shift in media. You know, when I started the work on GMOs, primetime TV, it was amazing, the failure of BT cotton in India, farmers' suicides. And then the media houses started to get threats. Yeah, if you call her again, we're going to withdraw advertising. And then, of course, the media has been bought over. I mean, there's articles about how Gates controls all the media today. How has industry responded? You know, I feel sad because they take one little individual with one bit of research, and then they put an army of trolls, an army of public relations people, and they work overtime to change the Wikipedia page to say I never studied physics, to constantly attack me and attack me and attack me. But I've never done any of this work, either for glory or for any gain. I've done it for seeking my truth and living a life of right action. So I've faced the attacks like one would in any other situation. And I'm grateful to all the other thinking people who appreciate independent thinking and want to defend seed freedom and food freedom like I want to defend it for all life.
Why was it important for you to come back and speak here at the Real Truth About Health conference?
Well, the Real Food About Health has 4 words, 3 of which are so central to my passions. Real. In a time where we have fake news and fake food and fake science, real becomes very important. And again, post-truth world, truth becomes very important. And the highest post-truth right now is around food and health. And therefore, the Real Truth About Health conference is an important place to be for all, whoever can join.
Thank you. We are so very thankful for your incredibly courageous stand for the planet and for all of us, and especially for all of your time here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you again, and we'll see you at the conference.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be well.
Yeah.